With that, I'd like to turn this next session over to Bob Heckey, Chairman of the Fisheries Commission, who will moderate the next section and do the introductions of the next panelists. So, Bob.
Thank you, John. I'd like to start just by congratulating the Great Lakes Commission on its anniversary. 60 years is no small accomplishment, and it's a well-deserved milestone, and we look forward to the next 60 years. We also appreciate the opportunity to participate in this very important discussion this afternoon. It's at the top of all our minds, and I appreciate the Commission inviting us to participate. So with that, I guess we'll move on to the next panel, who will talk about the path forward. We've sort of heard of where we are, and the next panel is meant to show where we might be. The panel will consist of Mr. Tim Brown, who is one of the mediators to the cause and also facilitating their meetings and discussions. We also have Mr. David St. Pierre he's the executive director of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and runs a staff of over 2,000 people and provides wastewater treatment to the 5 million residents of the Chicago area. Mr. Ben Brockschmidt is a Great Lakes Commission commissioner, but he's also executive director of the Infrastructure Council of the Illinois Chamber of Commerce. And lastly, but not least, we have Mr. Joel Brammeier, who is executive director of the Alliance for the Great Lakes. So we have quite a diversity of people here, and we expect to hear some quite different ideas on the path forward. So we'll start with Mr. Brown.
Okay. Is this on? Oh, it is. Hi. Thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here, and I've been told that my job is to set the stage a little bit about the Cause Advisory Committee. So I'll give you just a brief overview of what this organization is and what it's been doing, and then hand it over to my colleagues. The origins of the Advisory Committee really come from the Restoring the Natural Divide effort of both the Great Lakes Commission and the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Seaway Cities Initiative. There was an independent study to look at engineering options for preventing aquatic invasive species in the cause, and was undertaking its activities about the same time that Glimmers was undertaking its. At the conclusion of that, well, I guess within that study process, the Great Lakes Commission and the Great Lakes Cities Initiative brought together a broad range of stakeholders to react to ideas and provide input into the development of that work. Through that effort, there was a pivot to a more traditional advisory committee role, I guess is one way to put it, away from the Great Lakes Cities Initiative and the Great Lakes Commission's efforts to a process that was really more owned by the advisory committee members themselves. And I think it's a significant pivot insofar as the chairs of the Natural Divide process really took themselves out of that chair role and put themselves into a participant role, still a convening role, and handed over the reins to facilitators, me and Gail Bingham from Resolve. So we joined the team in April of last year and have been working with the committee ever since. The committee includes about 30 members representing a broad range of interests, from environmental organizations to transportation to local government, civic organizations, et cetera. It's a broad group of folks, not just from the cause region, but from around the Great Lakes and representing the Mississippi region as well. The purpose of the committee is to seek consensus on a long-term solution that would meet the criteria that Paul put up on the slide earlier, but I just want to reiterate what those are, which is preventing two-way interbasin transfer of invasive species between the two regions, the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River, maintaining and enhancing efficient maritime transportation and commerce through the cause, reducing flood risks in Illinois and Indiana, reducing the impact of combined sewer overflows in Illinois and Indiana, protecting or improving water quality in the cause, Lake Michigan and the Illinois River Basin, and meet federal and Illinois and Indiana environmental regulations, reduce the need for discretionary diversions from Lake Michigan, and create local benefits sufficient to facilitate local cost sharing. And we're trying to reach consensus around solutions that meet all of those criteria, which is a very tall order. So the process has been to facilitate an ongoing dialogue among the members to really understand the questions that they have in trying to work through a viable solution that can meet this criteria, and to look at a range of scenarios that might work. Important in this whole effort has been the technical support that HDR and Paul Durking have provided to undertake technical investigations that answer the questions that members have in order to narrow down the issues. And so those topic areas have been around issues of risk reduction, transportation, water quality, contaminated sediments, control technologies, control points along the cause, a whole range of technical issues that have helped inform the discussions of the group. So we've been chugging along since April of last year. We've issued 2 consensus letters to Congress and the administration thus far, focused on the need to proceed with detailed assessments of control technologies for the Brandon Road control points. We are working on another consensus letter on a narrowed down set of options for a long-term solution that would include the sorts of things that Paul mentioned earlier, ongoing non-structural control technologies, continued efforts around Brandon Road, an evaluation of the ANS lock concept, and an evaluation of establishing an ANS buffer zone in the cause. I want to emphasize that we have not reached consensus, that this is an ongoing discussion. We are working hard to try to narrow down a set of recommendations that we can, that all the members can live with by the end of the year. I can just give you a couple of observations. I think this is a unique effort to address a very large and complex and technical problem by bringing the diverse stakeholders together up front to help create a solution rather than to simply react to one. Consensus is not at all easy, yet it can be quite powerful. And I think many of the members feel that it is therefore worth it to hang in there on it. I can also observe that there are a lot of advisory committee members in this room today, so this is all feeling like a very familiar meeting. Anyway, I will pass it on to Dave.
Very good. First of all, welcome to Chicago. I am actually coming over here from another meeting that's occurring in Chicago where 25,000 of my water family across the country and around the world is meeting, talking about water issues. And I think utilities today realize that we have to be central to solving problems, including nutrient runoff, which is a particular issue in the Great Lakes Basin, rebuilding our infrastructure, reimagining how infrastructure should look today, addressing climate change issues, and yes, even talking about invasive species and how we deal with invasives. So the district is privileged to have been a part of this conversation for many years, and I just want to comment on what I think are 2 critical path concerns that I have that need to come to some kind of a resolution for us to proceed in any meaningful manner in this issue. I would suggest that my views aren't the views of the entire panel, but they are my views anyway. The first critical path issue that I believe we have to wrap our minds around is that we have to remind ourselves of the art of compromise. It's an art that we are losing in this country as polarized positions seem to keep us frozen in place from being able to address very important issues that we need to address today. I see, as we talk through this framework, that there are 2 extreme points of view that continually are brought up. One point of view is that we need to separate the waters completely, and the other point of view is that we need to do nothing, perhaps. I think either of those points of view are not acceptable in this particular situation, and we need to get beyond that, and we need to get down to the work of trying to decide what we can do in a realistic framework. That being said, we have made progress on at least looking at an idea of things that are worth looking at further. One is an invasive block. I believe that we need to accelerate some efforts in looking at that invasive block. The Corps does some very fine work. We have other agencies that are engaged in this work. I would suggest and just throw out a thought that there are many fine universities in the states and countries that are represented here, and we might entertain the option of tapping into the intellectual agencies, organizations that can build scale size hydraulic systems and prove a hydraulic lock. I think that the states in here represent some possibilities that haven't been tapped in that control point. People are around the table wondering and looking for answers to that question, can a lock be effective? I'll just comment that there was a question about the electrical barrier and its cost. I believe the electrical barrier costs that have been tabulated by the Corps have to do with the existing barrier, which is massive in comparison with a designed electrical barrier that could be engineered and installed at the entrance of a lock system. The second critical path issue that I believe we need to find a way forward is about dollars, and I think we need to be realistic about whether or not this can be funded. If this is a regional issue, then I believe that a region needs to grapple with this issue, and not only grapple or argue about this issue, but come to a resolution and solve that issue. I believe that I'm a part of the only agency that's at the table that has presented a viewpoint that I believe that there are pieces of this that I could actually sponsor. That is somewhat a bold statement if you think about the agencies that are like mine in your cities, that exist in your states, and the issues that they're struggling with today. A small gesture. That being said, there are of the measures that need to be implemented at the end of the day will be implemented because of control alone and won't be tied to a local issue. That being said, if this is a Great Lakes, Mississippi River Basin invasive regional issue, we have to address it that way, and there has to be regional support, and a sponsorship structure has to be developed if there's going to be movement. Because even if this group, quite frankly, comes to an agreement that here's a method and an answer and a solution, if there's no money that supports this and sponsors it, at the end of the day, nothing will be built, and we're not going to solve any problems. So I'll just conclude with a couple of thoughts. I do believe that this is an important issue that we do need to address together as a region. I believe we need to look for ways to accelerate that the coordinated group has come up with in terms of plumbing issues, in terms of water quality, in terms of transportation, in terms of the effectiveness of the controls that we're considering. Tapping into agencies that maybe we haven't considered in the past so that we can accelerate that work. And second, I would really like to challenge this commission to think about that funding opportunity and to wrestle with that so that if and when a solution comes forward, that there is a sponsorship and we can move forward together. Thanks for having me today.
Good afternoon. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Great Lakes Commission staff, for all of your work on this issue. As stated, I'm Ben Brockschmidt with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce and the Executive Director of our Infrastructure Council. I work with businesses across the state on planes, trains, automobiles, pipes, to make the business case for oftentimes public investment that has a positive impact on the economy, not just of Illinois, but of the country. Earlier, during World Business Chicago's presentation, they mentioned that roughly between a quarter to a third of the nation's freight comes through the Chicago region. That is a mix of railroads, of highways, of air freight, and of waterborne transportation. one of the biggest questions that has come up in addressing this issue, and I would stress the business community is fully behind efforts to address invasive species, aquatic or otherwise, and we have seen in a variety of areas across the world what type of impact invasive species can have on local economies. We want to work with that. What we do not think is that there is protection of one asset over another that makes one more important than the other. That is, waterborne and commercial navigation can coexist with the protection of two very important water basins that have a lot of potential, both in commercial and tourism, along with all the other benefits that come with that. The biggest questions that are raised primarily by the business community, and I use that very broadly to include not just the general business community of Illinois, but those industries that rely on the waterways, either to move goods and products, that move the goods and products, or that draw and discharge water from that system, is what are the infrastructure improvements necessary to properly address this, and what does that look like, and how does that impact everything else? A lot of the presentations throughout the day have focused on things being a network, a network, a network. About 3 years ago, there were low water levels in the lower Mississippi River down by St. Louis. As a result of that, billions of dollars of economic activity stopped because barges could not pass a certain point in the river. After congressional action, the problem was solved, but the impact on the agricultural communities of Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, Missouri, and Minnesota was significant. And what many of those people realized was that the freight network was not designed to just pick up part of their products on a whim. Within the Chicago region, if you were to match us, the Chicago region, up against the largest blue water ports in the world, would be number 3 in terms of tonnage. In terms of value, I think we're number 2. 6 Class 1 railroads operate here, and many of those railroads benefit from the close proximity to a lot of our neighboring states, who can bring products here by truck and compete with waterways and railroads to move their product. If you take away or impact any part of that system, particularly the waterways, there is a huge impact. One 15-tow barge equals roughly 216 rail cars, which comes out to just over 1,000 trucks. While the logistics field continues to grow in the Chicago area and across the country, there are workforce issues that are also coming up that also raise infrastructure questions. Fewer people are going into the logistics industry, which means there's fewer people to move product, no matter which mode you're talking about. Rail, air freight, water, truck. So as that starts to happen, what happens to those systems? How do more trucks on the road help or hurt congestion in the Chicago region? Many of you probably flew in the last couple days, and I hope you caught the Kennedy at a point or the Stevenson when it was actually moving. And if you did, you caught it at a very rare moment, because no matter what time of day, traffic is usually moving very slow on those systems. The exception is late at night. The other side of this comes down to the public health. It would be great to have a zero emission, perfectly clean world. But as you add those trucks, as you add those rail cars, the technology isn't there yet. Industry is working toward that. But the concerns come down to if you do not have the barge transportation, what's the local impact going to be at the railroad over a crossing? Or additional trucks going up and down by a school? Along with any type of physical infrastructure actually needed to maintain or implement a barrier or barrier type system. And when I say barrier, I refer to any one of the methods out there. And I do think Tim Brown and his associate Gail, and if you have the chance, please buy Tim multiple drinks, because I haven't had the chance. Because it has been a rowdy bunch at times. But ultimately, we have all stayed around the table and signed on to multiple letters because we want to reach a solution. A lot of the questions that remain, again, are the infrastructure and the large impacts. I will mention, as I think it's important to note, the Illinois Chamber Foundation, one of my affiliate organizations, is working on a study that will be out in mid-October, looking at the Illinois River system from T.J. O'Brien Lock down by Lake Calumet all the way down to LaGrange Lockett Dam, looking at the big users of the Illinois River system. That can be your MWRD, that can be the barge operators, that could be electrical generation, farmers, you name it. And we are looking at that specifically for examination of public-private partnership pilot programs, or P5s, that were authorized in the Water Resource and Reform Development Act, passed last year and signed into law by Congress and President Obama. We're intrigued by the idea of a Glimmer's Lock. We think there's some potential there to not just stop the spread of invasive species, particularly the aquatic kind, but also make a dent in the $500 million of deferred maintenance. I believe that's a number within the Illinois system. It could be higher. But there is a way forward on this. It's just a matter of how quickly can we come to that. And as Dave said, mastering the art of compromise and figuring out what those immediate steps are. And I think no matter what conversation you're having, whether it's long-term or short-term, I don't think the folks at the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the federal agencies that have been tracking and working to stop the carp really have got enough credit in these conversations. And I hope that when you have the chance, you thank them for all of their efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And you should feel free to buy any of us a drink, really, because it's been a festive 2 years. But first of all, thank you to the commission for taking this on. I know I spoke to you about a year and a half ago about this topic and really encouraged you not to back down in the face of this daunting complexity, and I'm glad that you continue to be a sponsor of this work. I also want to just note my colleagues. Ben, I know, is fully committed to the idea of a fully networked and efficient and productive Illinois transportation system. And I think that that's a conversation that we have to have, or else we're not having a complete conversation. And David, for putting some innovative concepts on the table for the group that we're working with, and not being afraid to say some things that, I don't know, might get you in trouble with somebody. Hopefully nothing you said today, but it's been a lively discussion, and I think we've made some great progress. Now, I want to point out something about the urgency of the situation we're in, just so we don't lose track of why we're sitting around this table. We did hear just now an update on information about where the young of the year carp actually are in the Illinois River, and what we're hearing is that they are about 60 miles from Lake Michigan. We're also aware that while the adult population front hasn't moved, we do see successful spawning activity, as I just said, happening closer to Lake Michigan than it has in the past. It's time that we take that information and convert it to action. Now we know, and I'll mention maybe an opinion that's somewhat different from my fellow panelists, that we have one solution that we know does provide two-way prevention of the movement of invasive species, and that's physical separation. We also know that that solution does not work for multiple stakeholders who are sitting around our advisory committee table for a variety of reasons, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So I want to remind you of something that I hope has come through in previous conversations, but that's essential to understanding the path forward. I believe the system we have in the Chicago Waterway is not only suboptimal, it is broken. It is broken for the purposes of efficient and productive transportation. It is broken for the purposes of fully protecting water quality and property, and providing the experience for residents and visitors alike that it ought to be providing. If we continue to ask a system that does not function optimally or function to support all of those assets and all of those demands equally, we're going to find ourselves bolting on technologies in the hopes that we solve a problem that this system actually has helped create in the first place. Now, we have gotten to a point with our advisory committee that I'm actually very pleased with, and I want to thank everybody on the committee, including my fellow panelists, for coming to a consensus that the work at Brandon Road needs to move forward quickly. It needs to move forward as quickly as possible, in fact, and we need to determine what's possible at that site and move to construction as fast as we can, because the carp, as you heard this morning, are moving toward Lake Michigan. And I'm really pleased that the committee has gotten to that point. We can contemplate that solution today because it doesn't require any changes to how we think about water quality or flood control or transportation. And in fact, it could turn out to be a positive for transportation should we see associated lock improvements become ancillary benefits of the work at Brandon Road. But that remains to be seen. I'm convinced that there is no solution to this problem that gets to two-way prevention that doesn't require significant investments and changes in the Chicago Waterway, near Lake Michigan, and the city of Chicago. I also don't think that the plans and the funding completely are going to come from Congress or the Army Corps to drive that plan in the direction that it needs to go. We need, and I think you've heard parts of this today, a true partnership that includes the federal government, but also includes collaboration from local implementers here in Illinois and the states that can drive toward a solution that satisfies the needs of everybody around this table. Mr. St. Pierre mentioned the need for further evaluation of this aquatic nuisance species lock. Absolutely. Figure out what the return on investment is. Right now, that's a 10% design. It's effectively a hypothesis that has never been built anywhere. So figure out what it can do for us and how much it's going to cost. Maybe that's the answer, maybe it's not, but we don't know that yet. This idea of dealing with the plumbing issues, as they've been referred to as shorthand, we have, if we do find that getting to a two-way solution means changing something about the way this system works near Lake Michigan, figuring out whether or not water can actually be returned safely to Lake Michigan, we are going to have to answer some very difficult and potentially very expensive plumbing questions that have major implications for local implementers like the city of Chicago and the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. Now, I don't think that Glimmerous did a great job of getting us to good answers on those questions. And in fact, I think we have an opportunity to build a partnership that can get us to better answers that are potentially not nearly as expensive as what was laid out there, if we make the right assumption that anything we do to change this system necessitates a much deeper understanding of the possibilities of changing it so it can protect water quality, improve flood control, improve transportation for northeastern Illinois. And that's the conversation that we need to have for this to be a complete action plan for the prevention of invasive species. The last thing I'll say before I close is simply that make sure that however we move forward over the next couple of years puts us in a place where we walk away with actions, not more studies. We need to be in a position where we decide what is the path forward and how does it get built, not we need more information about what the problem is. There's going to be a challenge here before you to figure out what does that appropriate collaboration look like. How do you build that network of local partners and potentially sponsors? Make sure the states have a seat at the table. Make sure that our federal government stays invested in this process, and we build toward a collaboration that can actually produce something that gets built. That's the challenge before us. We are contemplating certainly billions in costs to deal with this problem at the scale that it deserves. And I think in the spirit of the art of compromise, while we're not sitting here before you representing a consensus, we are representing a drive to collaborate, and I think that the Great Lakes knows how to do that. So I encourage you to find a path forward, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the speakers for giving us some very concise but some very stimulating thinking. I think we have till 3 o'clock for questions, so we have a few minutes. So I'll open the floor to questions at this time. Put your hand up if you'd like to make a question. Down there, yeah.
I was just wondering about the deferred maintenance on the existing system, if there's a value. I didn't recall if someone had put a value figure on that in terms of dollars needed for, or the value of deferred maintenance that has not occurred.
So one of the things that the Chamber Foundation study is looking at is what kind of impacts delays in the waterway system have. I don't know or remember the number offhand. I'm purely a notes person. I'm sure there's someone from the Army Corps with the Rock Island District, which has the majority of the system in Illinois, that could speak to that better than I could. But I do know that several years ago, part of the lock and dam fell into the dam, resulting in millions of dollars, if not billions, of lost transportation. The tonnage has changed over the last several years, has had the value, and it's more high value moving up and down this portion of the Illinois River. And I have a feeling that's going to make the numbers very different than if you're looking at it several years ago.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a minute and go back to Ms. Darcy's comments earlier about the focus on the risk reduction of everything that we're trying to achieve through the Chicago area waterways system work. And we know that these fish have become a primary biomass throughout the Mississippi River. They've inundated several other rivers, the White River, Arkansas, the Green River, Kentucky. They're coming up the Ohio River, the Wabash River, Indiana, into the Missouri River. and we're now talking about millions and millions of dollars that it's going to cost this area, this region, Great Lakes region, to try to abate that risk here in the Chicago area. Have we really documented the downside of these fish in the Mississippi River in some of these areas? And do we really know what the economic downside or the net economic impacts have been in other parts of the United States where these fish reside, in order to help us to put the Great Lakes risk into perspective through the negotiation process?
I'm going to try to answer that question with absolutely no knowledge.
That's great.
You know, I think that, you know, the question about invasive species is an interesting question because I don't think you really understand the impact and the evolution of your ecosystem until it happens, right? But I think that we can look at examples of invasives across this country that are absolutely destroying the ecosystems that they are thriving in. So I think the real question is, do we want to allow that to continue, or do we want to take proactive approaches to ensure that that devolution doesn't take place before we find out what that actual risk is? I've heard answers from biologists on both sides of this issue. But again, you look at what's out there, I don't think there's any question that invasives cause significant damage, and if they can be stopped, it's worth doing that.
I would just say predicting avoided costs based on an unknown response of a biological system is extremely difficult to do. I know the commission actually attempted to do this in a rough way in its Restoring the Natural Divide report. I would also offer, though, that I'm not sure if the comparisons between the Mississippi River habitats and the Great Lakes on the economic side will hold quite as much, given that one of the biggest concerns of Great Lakes impacts is coastal inland lakes and rivers where there's high concentrations of tourism activity and tourism spending, and parts of states that are extraordinarily dependent on revenues from those activities in a way that I don't know if that's the case for the sections of the affected segments of the Mississippi River Basin, but it certainly should be of great concern to Great Lakers.
We can have one more question.
Thanks. I just begin by saying thanks very much to the Commission for having us here today. It's always for me a great pleasure to come to Chicago. I absolutely love it here. And now that you have a proper baseball team for change, it's even better.
Ouch.
At least 1 out of 2, anyway. And I really do look forward to watching a World Series game between the Blue Jays and the Cubs in about 4 weeks' time. And when I listened to the presentations here this morning, the first thing that occurs to me is, of course, that as a member or representative of the federal government in Canada, we will contribute absolutely nothing to your solution, which my Canadian colleagues will tell me is extremely unusual for the federal government in Canada. It's not our normal posture. But what I'm particularly interested in as I listen to the conversation is, as you've moved along through what is really a very, very difficult, no, it's a really wicked problem you've got. Are there any things that you find yourself at this particular stage in the process where you find yourself thinking from a process and a structure point of view, I really wish we hadn't done it that way? Are there things that you can tease out that when you're advising or suggesting to other people how you deal with a really, really thorny problem like this in a similar context with different variables, based on what you've learned over the last several years insofar as how you've gone about resolving this problem? Are there a couple of things that really pop out that if you had to do it again, you might kind of rewind the tape and say, could we have a do-over, please? Let's do this a little differently.
Absolutely. And if we said that it was all smiles, we joke about buying us a drink. We're really not kidding on that. We'll take all the drinks you want to buy us. Because there are people on both sides that feel some groups shouldn't be at the table for one reason or another. Part of that goes to the approach of this. I've only been a part of this group for the last 3 years. My predecessors were engaged before that. Coming in from the outside partway through, it appeared that there were the initial steps in the initial direction. I think you have to be very careful about how you set that tone. And I think there are some remnants within this group where you still see that of things several years back. And by and large, we have made a very strong effort to move past that and focus on the future. But I think the other side of it is also really going out of the way to be inclusive of different viewpoints. Before Tim and Gail came in, there were several presentations about varying impacts, and several industry people were asked to give a presentation with about a week and a half to spare. And then we're bombarded by questions of members of the cause advisory group. Why don't you know A, B, C, and D? Well, industry, speaking as an association, isn't going to give me all their numbers all the time. That takes effort to put together. So I think you have to have the lead time and really go in knowing establish early on what are the unknowns you have to find out, and give people time, not all the time in the world, but ample time to come up with very good answers that then you can come back to the table. I think doing that would help this type of process moving forward. And I think that really, having the patience and understanding that it is a process, that there are things like NEPA and other things you're going to have to go through. There are a lot of unknowns. And Joel had said no more studies, and I think we're all mostly in agreement on that one. But if you are going to do studies, or if you're going to look at studies, again, find out what all the questions are so you don't have a glimmer scenario where you come back and go, okay, we asked them for a big detail and they gave us 8 options, and most of those are hypothetical, which only adds time to the process. That would be my observations, and I don't know, St. Pierre and Joel been a part of this.
I would just note, I'm sorry, Ben, I was not trying to take the mic away from you before you were done. I've never done that. But I would just add to that, that I kind of alluded to this in my comments. I believe that we have to rebuild the system in a way that solves this problem and solves several others. I think a number of us have felt that way for a number of years, but it was really clear that there was no local way to plug into a comprehensive vision for what that looks like in a way that connects to the people who are actually living here and using the system. We've tried to address that, at least contribute to addressing that, at least some members of the group have. And I think we've made some significant progress on that, but without a local network of people and stakeholders who are really connected to the regional needs that the Great Lakes are prioritizing, it had been very tough to make progress. And I think our group has tried to make changes to get there.
I guess I'd like to just add that if you're going to do this for another thing, I think getting the neutral parties involved up front is probably a good idea. I think that we came into this process midway, and for all the right reasons. The process was what it was at the time, and it evolved. But coming into it, it was like showing up at somebody else's family reunion, and you didn't, the relationships that were some good, some more challenging. And I think it's been hard I think for a lot of the participants to evolve along with the process, but I think that they've worked really hard at it and have done a remarkable job. One of the biggest challenges in this work is getting people to talk to one another and to hear one another. As we receive a lot of information, we receive it from individuals, but really it's about trying to get people to talk to each other and hear what their perspectives are. Without doing that, you can't really find a path forward that everybody can live with. So I mean, and this is a tough one. It's a really deep complex issue, and I think the group has worked really hard, and I commend them for it.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to cut this off. I'm sure everyone has many more questions. I believe the panel will be around for a while this afternoon yet. And I'll turn it back over to John.
Thank you again to the panel.